What's going on, everyone? It's Ben from YGO from Zero, back with another retro Yu-Gi-Oh video, and this video is going to be a bit different from what I normally make, but it was at the request of the Discord user Danny Droid, who won the last YGO from Zero monthly tournament that was in Yugi-Kaiba format. So as a bit of a reward for winning these tournaments, I allow the winners to sort of suggest a video topic for me to do, and Danny Droid's suggestion was to just go over some of the rulings in these retro formats that a lot of people have trouble with and just put them all in one place. But instead of doing it all as one video, which I initially was planning to do, I decided to actually split it up by format. I feel like this should make it easier for people to find specific rulings that they want to see. And also, I can then update this sort of later as I reach each new format, as opposed to just making new videos like, old Yu-Gi-Oh! Rulings Part 2, Part 3, so on and so forth. So I'll just break it up by format. That will make these videos likely a lot shorter than a lot of my other content. But I should be releasing about one of these each week, unless people want me to release a lot of them all at once, in which case let me know down in the comments below. I can definitely accelerate my release schedule on these. But for now, I figured this is good as a weekly video. If you want to keep up to date when these videos go up, the best way to do that is to subscribe and hit the bell. We're currently at just above 620 subscribers, and I'd really like to reach 750 by the end of this month. Maybe that would be a bit of a stretch, but I feel like it's a cool milestone, especially now that the channel's a year old. So if you're not already subscribed, please do so. In addition, if you want to play any of the retro Yu-Gi-Oh! Formats that I discuss in these videos for yourself, we have a Discord server, link will be in the description down below, but it's a great place to find games in these exciting formats and also join the monthly tournaments that we have and potentially get to suggest a video to me just like Danny Droid was able to here. And lastly, if you enjoy the video, as always, please do leave a like down below. It really helps out the channel a lot. But with all that out of the way, let's dive in to some of the trickier rulings in this format, or at least the rulings that trip people up. Now, the biggest problematic card in this format when it comes to rulings is definitely Ultimate Offering. There's a lot of weird stuff you can do with Ultimate Offering, and it can even be used to dodge Trap Hole if you know how to use it. I'm not going to dive completely into the many ways you can actually use this card to dodge Trap Hole. I have a whole nother video on that if you are interested in it. Link will be in the description down below, and it should be flashing up on screen as well here. But what I will talk about with Ultimate Offering that I don't think I actually mentioned in the video on dodging Trap Hole is that in order to use this sort of continuous trap effect in this format and many other retro formats, you have to actually have it face up on field before you use the effect. And this doesn't really come up often in this format. The only time it really will come up is if your opponent has a Trap Master or a Reaper of the Cards. And if they flip up Trap Master or Reaper of the Cards at a time when Ultimate Offering could normally be activated, you won't necessarily be able to use this effect to summon out additional monsters unless it's already face up on the field. This is a very unlikely situation. It only really happens if you fire a Swords Revealing Light when your opponent has a set monster and you have an Ultimate Offering. But it can come up, so I figured I'd mention it here. It will become a lot more relevant in future formats, but it is something good to know now. Moving on from Ultimate Offering, we've got arguably the most important ruling that comes up a lot in this format, which is reinforcements being able to be activated in the damage step. Now, there are only a couple of cards that can actually be activated in the damage step, and one class of those cards are cards that directly modify the attack and defense of a monster. And Reinforcements is one of the cards that does that. I think the only other one in this format is Castle Walls. But while in the damage step, you can't activate cards outside of Reinforcements and Castle Walls. Not even things like Woboku, which can come up a lot, especially if you're near the end of the game and you're at very low life. You might choose not to activate Woboku if you think you might live, but if your opponent does have Reinforcements that they can activate in the damage step, you could be in trouble. So it's always good to remember that if your opponent activates Reinforcements in the damage step, you can't actually respond to them with things like Woboku or even things like Reverse Trap. Reverse Trap is always a card that people new to the format see and they're like, oh, that's interesting. I wonder if this can be used. Not really, because Reverse Trap does not directly modify the attack and defense of monsters. It can't actually be used in the damage steps, so it's not really a good counter to something like Reinforcements. And speaking of Reinforcements, a ruling that doesn't often come up, but can, especially now that Reaper of the Cards is seeing more play in things like UO Control, is that if you attack in to something like a Reaper of the Cards, and you've only got one back row set, let's say it's a Reinforcements, then in the damage step, if you activate Reinforcements, while you flip up the Reaper of the Cards, then your opponent won't actually be able to target the reinforcements that you have with the Reaper of the Cards, because by the time the Reaper of the Cards effect goes off and is able to target a card, reinforcements will no longer be on the field, since it will already have resolved its effect and gone to the graveyard, given that the chain ended. So that's a bit of an interesting thing that can come up, and it doesn't necessarily come up often, as it's very rare to just have like one back row set in this format. But if it does come up like that, your opponent will have to select one of their own cards with Reaper of the Cards. And if they've got all traps in their back row, then, they might just be out of luck. So I do think that it pays to know this interaction just in case it does come up, as it can be really devastating for your opponent. Moving on to another niche situation that may come up more often than you think, it's card destruction. Now, one of the big decks in this format is Stall Mill, and what this deck generally does is it blocks you from attacking in with the 2K Defenders, Ultimate Offerings, Wuboku, Swords of the Light, etc. Stalls down the game until you've got a very low amount of cards in deck, and then can deck you out easily using things like card destruction. And in this format, card destruction can actually be activated when you have less cards in deck than you would be drawing. Now, this doesn't necessarily come up all the time, as oftentimes the Stall Mill player will just fire card destruction a little bit early. But when it does come up, it is good to know that that will actually cause you to lose the game if you've got less cards in deck than you have in hand, and your opponent will be able to activate it. Next up, we have a couple rulings that I think are a bit less important than the ones that have come before this, but they are still good to know. Wall of Illusion is a very interesting monster in this format. It's not played everywhere, but people do play it, and it says that if this card is attacked by a monster after damage calculation, return that monster to the hand. And this applies in most cases when monsters attack into it. But if you attack into a Wall of Illusion that's in attack position with something like a Maneater Bug that will lose that battle, the monster that's destroyed in that battle won't actually get bounced back to hand. This is a very rare case that almost never comes up, but it can come up. And it's really the only instance in which Wall of Illusion doesn't bounce back a monster to hand, as, even in cases where it's getting destroyed in that battle, it will still bounce the monster back to hand. It just won't do it if the opposing monster is the one getting destroyed by battle. And lastly, to set the record straight, we've got Lord of D. Now, there was a lot of confusion around the release of Lord of D and whether, this prevents just card effects that target dragons, or whether it prevents all effects from targeting dragons. And this comes from like a mistranslation of its original effect and its original printing. And so there's generally confusion surrounding this card when it comes to a lot of these old retro formats. But in Yugi-Kaiba format, it is generally ruled that it only affects cards that target dragons. So your opponent can still fire a Dark Hole or Raigeki even if you've got Lord of D and a field of dragons up, and that will destroy all the dragons. Now, this is just how it's ruled in the mainstream Yugi-Kaiba communities. I don't know if there are like other Yugi-Kaiba communities that play it differently. But this is the ruling that most Yugi-Kaiba communities, if not all Yugi-Kaiba communities, do go by. And that's going to do it for the Yugi-Kaiba specific rulings. I can't really think of any others. Let me know down below if I did miss any important rulings, as I very well could have. Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a very tricky game no matter what format you're in, and there are always some interactions that can come up. That'll be tricky rulings-wise. But this is all I can think of at the present time. Let me know what you think about these rulings down in the comments below. Let me know if I wasn't clear on any of the rulings that I mentioned here, or if you want clarification on something. I look forward to hearing from you all down in the comments below. But until next time, I've been Ben from YGO from Zero, and I'm signing off.